Hi everyone! Today I'm going to be making something called Scallion Pancakes, which are also called Konu Bing, and they're Chinese pancakes that are not like North American pancakes. They're crispy on the outside and they're soft and tender on the inside, and they're filled with scallions, otherwise known as green onions, and they're brushed on the inside as well with toasted sesame oil. So it's a very savory snack and it can be eaten as a meal for breakfast, lunch, or even supper. It's great, it's easy, but we need to start our dough at least 8 hours ahead. So I'm actually going to be starting my dough today, and then I will continue making the scallion pancakes tomorrow morning. So today, for the actual pancake dough, there's really only two ingredients. It's all-purpose flour and boiled water. So behind me, I have a kettle, and I've pre-boiled my water in the kettle, okay? It needs to be really hot in order to activate the gluten. And then I need all-purpose flour, okay? So just plain old white flour. And it's less important to sift or strain this recipe as it's a fairly easy dough. Okay, so I'm going to take 2 cups of all-purpose flour. So I'm going to measure it out and I'm going to level it off. So 1 cup and 2 cups. And then finally, I am going to measure out 1 cup of boiling water in my liquid measuring cup. Again, remembering that I'm always getting down to eye level, and be careful as we're pouring this, being cautious that it is in fact boiling water and I can burn myself, okay? So there's 1 level cup of boiling water, which I'm going to pour over my all-purpose flour. Now you have a choice for stirring. You can either use chopsticks or you can use a wooden spoon. So you're just going to manipulate the flour and the boiling water together until it starts to form a dough. And it's going to be shaggy at first, and as it comes together, it's going to get pretty sticky, okay? So when most of the flour has been absorbed into the water, or the water, pardon me, has been absorbed into the flour, at that point you could start using your hands, but you want to be cautious, okay? The bowl is hot, this is metal, it conducts heat. If you're worried about burning yourself, maybe use plastic or something that's non-conductive like Pyrex. And then when you're putting your hands into your dough, also be cautious that you are making sure that we don't burn ourselves. Obviously, we've well washed our hands beforehand to make sure that we're not going to get bacteria in our food. And you'll note that my my hair is tied back and that I'm wearing an apron, not only to protect my clothing, but to protect my food, okay? So I'm starting to mix the dough, and you'll see that now it's less shaggy and it's kind of coming together in little blobs. So you're gonna wanna continue to do this. I'm actually gonna push my sleeve up so that I don't get dough in it. I'm gonna continue to do this until all of the little bits are kind of absorbed in. And once this has happened, I'm gonna turn it out onto my surface, and I'm going to knead it for about 5 minutes. Some bits are hopping out of the bowl as they go. Okay, so you'll know when it's time to turn it out onto the board as all of the bits in the bottom have kind of come up and are now part of the dough. So you can see it sort of come together here in the bowl. And there's little bits left behind. So I'm just gonna use my dough and I'm kind of gonna rub it around in the bowl to make sure that I get any residual bits. I'm gonna turn it out onto my work surface here. I'm going to push up my other sleeve. Now, at this point, because I have a watch and rings on, I'm going to make sure that I take these things off and put them in a safe place, because I find when I'm kneading things, I don't want to make sure that I get all sorts of bits into my jewelry. So I need to knead this for about 5 minutes, or until the dough starts to come together. It's not going to be warm anymore at this point, and it's going to turn smooth and silky. Hey Google, set a timer for 5 minutes, please. So make sure that if you're setting a timer,
sure, 5 minutes. Starting now.
That you do it hands-free, because if you do take your hands off of the dough and go set the timer, you need to be diligent that you're going to have to re-wash your hands before you touch your dough, and you don't want to touch your dough with wet hands because you don't want to add any moisture to your dough. So when we are actually kneading our dough, the process that we're using the palms or the heels of our hand. So we're gonna take our dough and we're gonna push it out towards us, and you can see it's very malleable, similar to putty. I'll fold it over on itself. I'm gonna turn it 90 degrees towards me, and I'm going to push it out again and just repeat the process. And by doing this, I'm creating gluten or elastin in my dough, and I'm helping all of the water to absorb into my flour. So some people have different kneading techniques. Sometimes if I'm kneading a large quantity of dough, I'll push my hand out with one side and then push with the other, alternating so that my hands don't get fatigued over time. So it's really up to you, but you really want to make sure that you're working your dough, because if you don't work it, the gluten is not developing and it's not going to get that smooth texture and feel that you're going for with this pancake. So this recipe doesn't make a lot of pancakes. It actually only makes about 4 7-inch pancakes total, but each pancake generates about 6 pieces or 6 little squares total, and they're pretty filling. So we're gonna create a dipping sauce tomorrow to go with our pancakes, and this will sort of enhance the subtle flavor of the scallions inside the pancake itself. So you can see now that my dough is changing. So if I hold my dough up, you'll note that it's much smoother than it previously was. It's less shaggy looking, so that's a good sign. Now I need to make sure that I continue working my dough for that amount of time. If you notice that your arms are fatigued or whatever, take like a little break and continue kneading. The important part is the building of the gluten, not necessarily that it's a consistent 5 minutes. Of course, if you are really feeling like you couldn't do this by hand and you have a stand mixer, you could use a dough paddle if you really wanted to. I do have a KitchenAid in the back corner over there, but I prefer to work this by hand because it is a small quantity of dough, okay? And if you were making a triple recipe, then maybe you might want to add the mixer into the equation, but just for this, it's pretty good. So it's starting to feel quite smooth, and you'll see that on my board, there's no real residue. It's not like a bread where you're gonna get a lot of sticking, because it's not a particularly sticky dough. And the board being wood tends to help with the non-stick. But if you do find that it's sticking, I mean, you could use a tiny bit of flour on your counter, but I really don't think that it's necessary overall. Hey Google, how much time is left on my timer?
T-minus 1 minute and 40 seconds.
So you can see that the time does go by pretty quickly, especially if you're talking like I am. Best put your favorite song on and you can dance while you knead, or I don't know, sing along to karaoke or something like that. But if there's multiple people in the kitchen, obviously it goes much faster because you can sub in and out while you're kneading. But the most important thing, like I said, is that you're building the gluten. Then when we're done building the gluten, after we've kneaded for 5 minutes, we're gonna put it into a container, could be a Tupperware or a bowl with saran wrap on top, and we're gonna put it into our refrigerator overnight to relax for 8 hours, okay? And the reason that you wanna do this is after 5 minutes of constant kneading, you've built up a lot of gluten, and it'll be too hard for it to roll out. It'll be much easier tomorrow after it's had a chance to relax, absorb all the rest of the water, which is actually called autolyse in French. And we want to make sure that our dough is a consistent feel throughout. That there aren't any dry bits, that there aren't any bits that are too moist, and they'll be ready to build our pancakes, okay? So my dough is almost done, and I know this A, because I have a timer, but B, because of the texture and feel of it. So the tension of the dough has built quite substantially. It's quite firm now. It's less sticky than it was before, and it's much silkier in terms of the overall touch. And it actually feels like the skin as on a baby's bum. Hey Google, stop the timer. So when it's up, you can actually see, we're gonna zoom in, see how smooth it is, okay? So there's zero like little pock marks. There's no little bits that are stuck. Okay, it's very smooth and beautiful looking. So I'm gonna take this nice dough now, and I'm just gonna grab a container with a lid from my Tupperware drawer. And I'm gonna place my dough inside here. And I'm gonna seal it up. And I'm going to be ready to use this tomorrow when I go to roll out my pancakes. So I'm gonna fade out right now, and I'll be back again tomorrow to roll these out and fry them up on the stove. Thanks again. Hi everyone, and welcome back again. We're going to be making the second part of our scallion pancake. So earlier we made our dough for our scallion pancake, but before we get started, we're just going to wash our hands. Important now more than ever. Making sure that we do all the motions that we talked about in class, between our fingers, around our thumb. Okay, so as mentioned yesterday, this recipe makes 3 pancakes, about 8 to 7 inches in diameter. And once we make our pancake rounds, we'll start stuffing them with our scallions. But before we roll out our scallion or our pancakes, we're going to trim our scallions or our green onions from the white ends. So I've already washed my onions here. I've just trimmed it down a little bit so you can see here that the whitest part of the onion is gone. Okay, and basically all that's left is the green, light green, and the dark green portion. That's exactly what we want. We need about 2 cups total of finely sliced scallion or green onion. So you're gonna wanna make sure you have a good knife and a cutting board. And we're going to carefully slice these up, pushing them over and making sure that if you're using a wooden cutting board, that you wash it really well afterwards, because the onion has a tendency to impart flavor on wooden boards, which is why I'm using this red plastic board here instead of my nice wooden board underneath, okay? Again, this is personal taste. If you really like the oniony flavor that the white part of your scallion brings, feel free to use the entire scallion. Obviously, it's slightly wasteful if you get rid of a giant portion of it. Okay, when I have all of my scallion diced, I'm going to put it aside. This is called mise en place, so we're doing all of our prep for our pancake later on. So I'm going to transfer all of this into a bowl so that I can free up my wooden board here so that I may roll out my pancake dough. Okay, so all of my scallions are now prepared. I don't really need to do any other dicing right now. Ooh, these are actually kind of mean for green onions. I'm gonna put that aside. And you'll note that I just had a wet cloth actually underneath my board. It prevents my plastic board from slipping and sliding on top of my wooden board. So I'm just gonna pass this to make sure it's nice and dry, and I'll set this aside before I take out my dough. I'm not gonna want to put my dough down on a surface that's wet, okay? Because the idea is that our dough has enough moisture in it from the boiling water that we added in yesterday. And it is a fairly sticky dough, okay? It's kind of like a dumpling dough if you've ever made dumplings before, or pierogies. I'm gonna lightly flour my surface here, okay? I'm just gonna move that aside. And I'm gonna take my dough and I'm going to turn it out, and I'm going to lightly flour my dough. And the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to visually divide it into 4, okay? So I have my coupe-out here, or my bench scraper, and I'm going to divide my dough into half, and then I'm going to turn it, and I'm going to divide it roughly into quarters. Don't worry about if it's not exactly perfect, but as long as you have 4 pieces of dough that are about equal in size, you want to give them a sprinkle to make sure that they're not going to stick to your board while you are rolling each one out. Sorry. And I'm going to take my little triangle that I've cut, and I'm going to roll it roughly into a ball, okay? And I'm going to put it here, and I'm just going to sort of pat it out into a circle, again making sure that the flour is making good contact with my dough, because it, like I said, it's pretty sticky. And I'm going to take my rolling pin and I'm going to roll my roller. I'm going to move my knife off of my block. Now, I need to roll this out in a circle, okay? So I don't want an oval, I don't want a square. So when we're rolling with a rolling pin and we want to make sure that we're rolling in a circle, it's really important that we continue moving our dough around as we go. So I'm going to pick it up periodically and I'm going to move it around so that I maintain the shape of a circle. If I note that it's starting to look like an amoeba or a triangle instead, well then I'll have to make sure. So I'm picking it up periodically and I'm putting it in the flour just to make sure that it is in fact not sticking to my board. And it needs to be pretty big, like I said, 7 to 8 inches in size, which is fairly large. And you want it to be fairly thin, okay? Because you're rolling this up similar to a cinnamon bun as we stuff it. So when we're rolling it up, you're rolling the dough over on itself, and if the dough is too thick, it's not going to make for a very nice texture, okay? So you want to make sure that you're rolling it evenly all the way to the edge so that we have no parts that are thicker than one another. And it's very elastic, okay? So as we work, you'll note that it'll sort of slingshot back on itself. That's totally okay. So now that I have my circle roughly formed here, you can see the size of it, okay? It's about 7 to 8 inches in size. The first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to take some toasted sesame oil, okay? And it's about a 1/4 cup total, although I mean, if you use it all up, you need to probably take more. I'm going to pour it into a little bowl or a dish. And I'm going to take my paintbrush here, okay, so this is a pastry brush, and I'm going to take my sesame oil, making sure not to get tons of it at once, because this is pretty much my flavoring, and I'm going to brush all of my nice dough edge to edge with this toasted sesame oil. So if you've ever smelled toasted sesame oil before, it smells amazing. And it's one of the things that imparts this sort of richness or the umami flavor that's in the pancake, okay? So we've brushed now edge to edge. I'm going to set that aside. And I'm going to take my green onions here and I'm going to lightly sprinkle these on top of my pancake, trying to carefully spread all the way to the edge. It's kind of like a pizza. You want to make sure you get a little bit of everything everywhere. You don't want to put so much that it gets like wet inside, because as we're rolling it up, it can be kind of mushy, especially if you've overworked your green onions. So that's about good. So you can see here there's a nice smattering of green onions. And then I'm going to take my salt, okay? Usually kosher salt, but like any type of salt, this is pink Himalayan salt. And we're going to just give a nice grind of salt on top of my pancake. So not terribly a lot, but enough. Now I'm going to start with my dough and I'm going to basically make a cinnamon roll shape. I'm going to take my dough and I'm going to start rolling it towards me, and I'm going to try and make the snail as tight as possible. And you want to make sure that you're constantly making the ends as tight as possible, because if it starts to unroll itself, then it won't really work and won't make as nice a pancake. So again, pushing and making sure that we're getting a very nice roll here. So you can see here that now my pancake is in a complete roll. Okay, it's very nicely shaped. Okay, and then what I'm now going to do is I'm going to make a snail shape with my cinnamon bun. So I'm going to take the tail and I'm going to turn it in on itself, rolling it up like this, keeping the seam inside like this and tucking it underneath. And then I should have something that looks similar to this. So it looks sort of like a cinnamon roll, but it's actually just a scallion pancake instead. And then what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take my rolling pin, and again, we're making sure that we flour our rolling pin. We don't want a ton of flour because you don't want your pancake to be like super floury. So I'm just gonna roll this and put a tiny bit on my little guy here. And then I'm going to press my scallion pancake down with my rolling pin, being sure to make good contact but not press so hard that I shatter the shape of the pancake and make all of the scallions squish out. Now, some of the scallions are going to manipulate themselves out of some of the small holes slowly. That's totally okay. This is a very elastic dough and it will continually slingshot back on itself. You want to make it as big as you can without destroying it, okay? So again, it started out at about 8 to 7 inches and it's gonna finish up a tiny bit smaller than that. So this is like a perfectly formed scallion pancake here that's been rolled out really nicely, and you can see that some of the scallions are kind of breaking through at the top here, and that's totally fine, okay? I'm gonna set that aside. Okay, I'm gonna put a little bit of flour on top of him here so he doesn't get stuck to my board. And then I'm gonna move on to my next pancake. Okay, so same thing. I'm gonna take my circular bit of dough here and I'm going to roll it back out. Okay, so here's my dough and I'm rolling. And I'll show you one more before we take a break and I get everything else rolled out, and then I'll come back and I'll make my dipping sauce, okay? So all of my pancakes have been formed now, so 4 in the tower with a little bit of flour between each layer so that they don't get stuck. We made sure that our working area is now all tidy. You can see my board's been cleaned up, and through the magic of television, everything's disappeared. So right now we're going to work on our dipping sauce, which will be for the little wedges of our scallion pancake. So in a small bowl, we're going to combine a couple of ingredients. So we have 2 tablespoons of soy. It can be dark or light soy. This is sodium reduced soy. So 2 tablespoons of the soy sauce. And then I have 2 tablespoons of rice wine vinegar. Now it could be seasoned or unseasoned. Most of the time you get the one that's already seasoned, so it's slightly sweetened and has a little bit of salt that's been added to it, usually for when you're seasoning your sushi rice. And it's the same quantity. I want 2 tablespoons of rice wine vinegar. Okay. And then I am going to add, I reserved here about a tablespoon worth of scallion greens in the bottom of my bowl. And I'm just going to add in those scallion greens into my dipping sauce over here. And I'm going to add in 2 teaspoons of sugar, okay? Now this sweetens the dipping sauce just slightly so that it makes it sort of sweet and savory, sort of like that umami. So I'm just gonna put that in there, and the acidity of the white wine vinegar is going to dissolve the little granules of sugar. So while that sets, I'm just gonna use my chopsticks that I have reserved here to stir that up a tiny bit. Make sure that my granulated sugar starts to dissolve. And the last ingredient that I'm going to go ahead and put in my dipping sauce is a knob of garlic. So I need about a half a teaspoon of garlic, so pardon me, ginger. A half a teaspoon of ginger grated. So this is fresh ginger. You could use minced ginger if you had that in the little jar in the fridge, but we're going to go ahead and we're going to peel this. So you have a couple of options for peeling your ginger. The first option that I really like is just a spoon. So using this part of the spoon, so the top of the spoon, I'm just going to hold it in my hand like this, and I'm going to drag it towards myself. And the skin on ginger is very thin. So it just kind of naturally comes away very cleanly. So you can see there that that's the ginger that's been peeled. And ginger is very fibrous. So when we're grating it, we actually get very little ginger out of a piece that's quite large. So you'll want to clean a piece that's quite a bit larger than you need, because by the time you actually grate it all down and get your ginger out of there, then you don't have a lot that's left, okay? So we're going to be using a box grater on the fine side, but I actually have a ginger grater that I normally use, but because I know most of you won't have that tool, a box grater is just fine. You could also use a microplane or a zester if you had one of those at home, which is an excellent tool for that as well. Okay, so here's my knob of ginger, and I've cleaned all of the peel away. So it's nice and clean now. It's all that kind of light yellow color. And I'll show you my other tools that you could use for here. So number one is my ginger grater. So this is what a ginger or nutmeg grater looks like. It's kind of a flat design that has some like little blades on it. And these blades are just meant to sort of scuff up the ginger. And then I have my microplane, which is also a really useful tool, which we talked about in class. And it's basically a zester. Okay, it looks like this. It's got small holes in it, and it has tiny blades that are quite sharp. And when you drag ginger or garlic or other soft things, even like cheese, Parmesan cheese, it's excellent for that. Across it, it works great. But for our demo purposes, I'm going to use the fine side of my box grater, okay? So again, I need about 1/2 teaspoon total. So I'm gonna take my ginger and I'm just going to grate it down this side of my box grater. And fresh ginger smells awesome. And the ginger's not actually gonna drop down onto my board. I'm gonna physically have to go inside my grater after I'm done and kind of use my hands to pull the pulp off of the grater itself. So you can see on my board here, there's actually very little. But if I look inside my grater, you can see all of the ginger is suspended in there. So I'm gonna take my 1/2 teaspoon and I'm going to take my 1/2 teaspoon and kind of drag it on the inside of your grater. Now, this is totally up to you. I love ginger. I like the taste of it. I'm gonna put a heaping 1/2 teaspoon of grated ginger into my dipping sauce. And then I'm going to take my chopsticks again and I'm going to stir that up and let that sit. So the ginger is gonna infuse itself into the garlic and the soy, giving it a beautiful flavor. You could make this spicy if you wanted, and you could add a little bit of hot sauce or chili paste or something like that. And that would give you an excellent flavor too, but you can always just put the chili sauce on top of your pancakes as well while you're serving them, okay? So our dipping sauce is now done. We're setting that aside, and the next thing we're gonna do is we're going to get our pancakes on the fryer. So if you'll note behind me on the stove, you can see 2 red pans, okay? I have 2 of my elements on low, and those 2 elements have just been preheating very slowly. These are steel pans, kind of similar to cast iron. They're very conductive in terms of their heat. Nice and even, very heavy bottoms. It prevents burning, and it allows you to heat the pan up pretty slowly and get a nice even heat. If you have a non-stick pan, which you can totally use, you want to not preheat it too far in advance because they typically have very thin bottoms. It'll warp your pan and it will start to degrade your Teflon, which is the non-stick coating that's inside the pan. So I'm getting ready to fry my pancakes. I have my 4 pancakes here. I have vegetable oil, I have salt, and I have something to turn my pancakes over. So I have tongs and I have chopsticks. You could use a flipper or a turner. Again, we're making sure that our pans are really well preheated on the stove, medium low if your stove is pretty powerful and your pans are hot like mine. If you're using non-stick, I wouldn't go above medium because you're gonna get really burning. These pancakes take about 2 minutes each side to get enough color and then to make sure that the dough is cooked through. That's the big thing. You don't want the outside to burn before the inside of the dough is fully cooked. So for this recipe, you need about 1/4 cup of vegetable oil total for your 4 pancakes. So that's going to be a couple tablespoons per pan total. So you want your oil to be shimmering, and this is a shallow fry recipe. So you want the whole bottom of your pan to be full with a little bit of oil, but you don't want it to be swimming. So I'm going to repeat the same procedure here with this pan. I'm just going to make sure that the bottom is full of a coating of oil. And you'll know that your oil is ready to put your pancake in when it starts to shimmer. So the appearance of the oil will change. It'll start to ripple almost in a way. And that's the time where you know that it's right to put your pancake in. So when that happens, you're gonna wanna do 2 sides of the pancake, 2 minutes per side roughly, and we're going to want to season each side of our pancake with a little bit of salt as it goes into the pan. So before my pancake goes into the pan, since it's going to go this side down, I'm just going to go ahead and season this particular pancake here. Okay, so this is the one that's going in first. And you can see that the oil is starting to change, and it's starting to get sort of like a shimmering pockmarked effect. And we want to make sure that when we're putting our pancake in the oil that we do it away from us so that we're not splashing oil towards ourselves. And we're going to repeat the same thing on the next pancake for the next pan. Now you can do this in one pan. I am just using 2 pans to speed the process up. And now that it's face down, I'm going to season the second side of my pancake with the salt. Hey Google, set a timer for 2 minutes, please. And now this is the point where you're going to have to play around with your temperature. So if you'll notice that this one is much angrier than this one is, this one, the knob is quite low. It's just 1 notch below low, whereas this one here is a little bit higher because the burner is less powerful. That's just my stove. So we might have to turn that one up. This is optimal. You'll see that around the edge of your pancake, it's going to start to change color. It's going to sort of take on a translucent look, okay, where it's cooking. It's similar to if you've ever made actual pancakes, you'll note that the edge always starts to cook before the inside of the pancake. But unlike traditional North American pancakes, you're not going to get that bubbling effect that a pancake has. So you don't really know when to turn it over beyond the fact that you're going to have to take a peek here and there. 2 minutes is a guideline. There's nothing set in stone. Again, you want a nice crust on your pancake. So what I'm going to do for the pancakes that are done is I'm going to take paper towel, although it appears this is the last little bit of my paper towel. And I'm going to fold this over, and you can just put it on a cutting board or put it on another plate, and you want to make sure that you absorb that extra oil from the pancake as they come out. Okay, so this one's slowed down a little bit. Again, I'm going to play around with it. I'm going to turn it back up. This guy here is slowed down because the temperature of the pan's dropped as the pancake's gone in. Because the pancake was cool and the pan was warm, that's what happens. Okay. You can see my pancake is quite happy. There's a nice bubbling around the edge, and you can actually see that the scallions that are there at the bottom are starting to change color and become kind of a golden brown. That's exactly what we want. We want a nice, crispy, delicate pancake. So crispy on the outside and still cooked through. That's the big thing. No one wants to eat raw dough on the inside of their pancake. So we're just gonna take a peek to see what's going on under there. Oh, and that's perfect. Hey Google, stop the timer. So I'm going to turn my pancake over, and you can see there that it's formed a beautiful crust. This one here is, again, the burner is a little bit less powerful, so I'm going to turn my temperature up to medium. Hey Google, set a timer for 2 minutes, please. And the second timer that I'm going to set is for this pancake here for that side, and then this one we're just going to play it by ear to make sure that it's getting enough color, okay? So we're going to still turn that one back up because this burner is apparently very underpowered compared to the other. This one here is looking gorgeous, okay? It's got beautiful color all around. There's no burning. You can see that the scallions are not blackened, they're just browned. You'll know your pan is too hot if your scallions turn black, and the smell is amazing. Obviously I have my hood fans off right now. Normally I would have my hood fan on to get rid of the smoke and the extra smell, but for this video purposes we don't want to put that on because it creates too much background noise, okay? So as your pancakes come out, you're going to put them on your paper. If you're doing all 4 pancakes in the same pan, what I would do is I would put my oven on warm, which is this button right here, and it's 170 degrees, and that would just keep your pancakes warm in your oven until you're ready to serve them. So if you're using one pan and you have to do, you know, like 4 different shots, then that would make your pancake take a little bit longer and they would cool down fast. So this guy here just got flipped over. Because of his shape, he kind of had a divot mark in him. Don't worry about if the browning is not even. That's just dependent on the size and the shape of your pancake. Totally depends on your pan and your burners as well, as long as it's cooked through. That's our main concern. It's kind of like if you've ever made quesadillas or if you've ever made grilled cheese. The real key is to make sure that the outside is not browning faster than the inside of the cheese is melting, okay? Or if you've ever made fried bread too, it's very similar to that. Wow, this guy looks fantastic. I can't wait to dig into that. Oh, I think I forgot to give this side an extra. Even though this is the side that went down, sometimes in the oil it tends to come off of itself. Hey Google, stop the timer. Okay, so this is our finished pancake. You can see it's shimmering, it's glistening, it's beautiful. I'm gonna put that onto my paper towel over here, and I'm going to season the next one, and I'm going to continue just popping these in the pan until all of my pancakes are done. So all 4 of my scallion pancakes are now fried up and ready, and I'm going to chop them up to serve with my dipping sauce and give them a go. So I'm going to choose this one here as my serving piece. And when I chop my pancakes up, I'm just going to use a chef's knife, and if they're about this size, which is the 5 to 6 inches that I had spoken about before, I'm going to cut them into 6 pieces. If they're slightly larger, like this guy here, then you're going to cut it into 8 pieces, similar to a quesadilla. So I cut it in half first, and then I'm going to cut one way and another way. Okay, so these are all 6 of my delicious looking bits here. I'm making sure that they're cut all the way through. Okay, and we're going to just arrange my little friends here so that they look delicious. And then I'm going to take my dipping sauce that I previously prepared, just making sure to give it a nice stir so that the ginger gets dispersed and the scallions as well. I'm going to put that into my dipping sauce. Okay, so that's what it looks like when it's all presented. It looks delicious. All my pancakes are nice and cut up. My dipping sauce looks inviting. And I'm going to take my scallion pancake and I'm going to dip it in my sauce. And give it a go. And that's a good pancake. It has nice flakiness. It's salty. If I look inside, the wedge, the laminated layers are coming up. That's exactly what you want. You can hear that crispiness and crunch. It's fantastic. It's savory and delicious. And you definitely have to make this at home. Thanks for watching.